Discover the incredible moment, Waitress's unexpected response to a $5,000 Millionaire challenge. Sarah glanced around the bustling diner, the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation wrapping around her like a familiar blanket. Just another Thursday, she thought, sliding a cup of coffee in front of Mrs. Thompson, her wry smile flickering under the fluorescent lights. Yet, today had a different energy. Tom, the flamboyant millionaire, had rolled into town, throwing a challenge that promised riches to anyone who could impress him. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, reminding her of the struggles her single mother faced and the dreams she had for her younger brother. $5,000 could change everything, but at what cost? A hodgepodge of contestants danced through the diner, their exaggerated gestures and hollow charm like a circus act gone awry. Sarah felt their eyes glance over her, dismissive, as if she were a relic amongst the glossy faces. She was not one for indulgence or tricks, she found joy in her simple ways. Her heart tightened at the thought of her family's struggles. Could I really turn my world upside down for cash? She mused, facing the gnawing question of whether self-doubt and fear of conformity would drown out her authenticity. As each competitor paraded their flashy routines, she relied on her genuine warmth, greeting her customers with care. The diners seemed to appreciate her, but the competitors sneered and rolled their eyes, igniting an unease that curled deep within her stomach. Her ideals began to tremble under the weight of expectation. The laughter of the contestants blended into an oppressive cloud of pressure, and she found herself questioning her place, her worth. A rising tide of frustration surged, but every smile she offered felt more forced, as the whispers of comparison lingered just out of earshot. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Just as the pressure mounted and the humiliation of ineptness began to creep in, a cruel rivalry ignited. Sarah's unwavering pride was tested as some of the competitors found ways to ridicule her earnestness. Self-doubt began to blossom, twisting into a choking vine of shame. One evening, when a cruel jab sliced through the air and laughter erupted, her smile faltered. In that gut-wrenching moment of vulnerability, something shifted. Tom's eyes flickered towards her, lingering with curiosity, which momentarily pulled her from the brink of despair. Despite the din around her, a flicker of clarity emerged. She needed to stay true to herself, even as anxiety wrapped around her throat like a noose. Yet the tension was palpable, and every heartbeat echoed the stakes hanging in the air, success accompanied by compromise. This was a point of no return, and the choice ahead threatened to unravel everything she believed to be right. The contestants performed ever more extravagantly, staging a circus of phony cheer while she stood, arms crossed, heart racing. And at that moment, standing amidst the clamor of empty charm, Sarah's insides screamed with urgency. Was it too late to return to her roots? Would it crush her family to watch as she stumbled down a path tainted with greed? Tom, locked into her solemn gaze, appeared entranced. The air thickened with possibility. Could her heart withstand the clash of dreams against integrity? Focusing her mind, Sarah leaned against the edge of the counter. The scent of coffee mingled with the faint aroma of syrup from the waffle station, yet the comfort these familiar smells usually provided felt distant. The eye of the storm seemed to be her own inner conflict. She watched her competitors parade their personas, wondering how long she could uphold the facade of normalcy. Driven by a pulse of determination, she weighed her options. That $5,000 shimmered like a mirage, promising escape, new beginnings, something more than her present life could offer. Yet, the reality of such a choice quelled all enthusiasm. What would it cost her? She scanned the room, the laughter of contestants contrasting starkly with the genuine warmth she offered to her customers. Who was she truly? What kind of person sacrificed their authenticity for fleeting success? As the night progressed, tension mounted. Tom had hoisted his microphone high, inviting contestants to showcase their talents. Sarah's heart beat heavily against her ribs. What skill do I possess that he would see as worthy? She questioned, grappling with embarrassment and the pressure to prove herself. Her fingers trembled around her notepad, and she took in a deep breath, spying an elderly couple laughing together. Their joy grounded her. Perhaps for them, the performance brought delight, but for her, it symbolized disparity. In the midst of the exuberant chaos, her thoughts spiraled deeper. Were these grandeur-loving contestants living their authentic lives, or had they, too, surrendered to the lure of acceptance for something as transient as a potential cash prize? The irony clenched at her. Here she was, surrounded by those who thrived on deception, yet she questioned her own worthiness. Instead of cheap tricks, though, she decided to consider what genuine impressions meant to her. What if impressing Tom didn't mean transforming into someone she wasn't? Her perspective began shifting, snapping back like a taut rubber band. Each patron in the diner represented a silent judgment, but instead of faltering, she had to harness that energy. In a quiet moment of fierce clarity, the realization struck: impressing Tom would not mean mimicking her competitors' performances. If anything, her authenticity was her strongest asset. With a newfound resolve, she stepped away from the counter and took a moment to gather her thoughts. What if she performed with an unguarded heart? She could deliver a direct, honest experience, one that illustrated who she really was. Sarah envisioned presenting not only her work as a waitress but the very essence of why she worked, the stories she carried with her, the families she served, and the lessons learned. She recognized the risk of vulnerability but felt empowered. Perhaps one step forward would mean stepping into herself. As the applause faded from another flashy performance, she felt Tom's gaze on her. She accepted the challenge ignited within. It was not about fitting in but about standing out because she dared to be real. Unexpectedly, the diner filled with a charged atmosphere, and whispers of anticipation spread through the contestants as Sarah approached Tom. The weight of her decision sat heavily in her chest, but she met his eye, sensing his curiosity was not merely about spectacle but perhaps something deeper. This is it, she thought, ready to unveil her heart, driven by a resolve forged in the fires of self-doubt. Would she break free from the expectations that bound her? As she moved closer, the specter of fear lingered, clawing at her thoughts. The urge to flee washed over her. Yet, she felt a flicker of purpose momentarily igniting confidence that urged her to speak. In that decisive moment, would her honesty resonate with him, or would it ultimately expose her for the inadequacies she battled? Would she dazzle him by holding on to her true identity, or would the shadows of competition overwhelm her? The choice hung palpably in the air as Sarah steadied herself, ready to challenge not only Tom's perceptions but her own insecurities. The seconds dragged on, stretching time into a fragile thread that Sarah felt she could snap with a single breath. With each step closer to Tom, a cacophony of doubts raced through her mind. She was painfully aware of the laughter and cheers echoing around her, contrasting starkly with her own internal chaos. The once lively atmosphere of the diner felt murky and daunting, a stage laden with expectations, not just from others, but from herself. "I'm not just a waitress," she whispered inwardly, her resolve strengthening with each thought. "I am more than an employee serving pancakes and coffee. I have stories woven into the fabric of every interaction." This moment was not just about Tom's judgment, it was about reclaiming her voice, her essence, and her narrative. As she approached, the faintest flicker of uncertainty washed over her. Standing before Tom, she felt exposed, as if her vulnerability was a raw wound laid bare beneath the bright lights. The realization that she had to be authentic struck her like a ton of bricks. "But can I really pull this off?" she questioned silently. She had spent years tailoring her demeanor to avoid confrontation and to blend into the background. Tom's friendly expression turned inquisitive, a silent invitation. She could feel the weight of his attention bearing down on her, and just as she felt that familiar claw of fear, a shudder of determination coursed through her. This was her defining moment, a thin line dividing who she was from who she wanted to become. Drawing in a deep, steadying breath, Sarah could almost feel the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble. Time slowed as her heart raced with the prospect of not merely performing but sharing who she truly was. She knew that the competition surrounding her was rife with facades, but she could offer something that no one else could: a genuine story for genuine people seeking connection. "Tom," she began, voice quivering but clear. "I know my skills seem mundane in the grand scheme of talent and performance. But I want to share something real. Each cup of coffee I serve and every conversation I have tells a story of resilience, laughter, heartache, and joy." She paused, letting her words hang in the air, hoping he would see her sincerity. The audience's attention shifted as whispers faded to silence, their curiosity sharpening. Here she was, not just vying for money or recognition, but proposing a moment of honesty in a world that glorified the superficial. "I've learned that the people I serve, the regulars who grace this diner, have taught me more about life than any grand performance ever could." Courage rushed through her as she continued, "Perhaps more than entertaining, I can evoke emotions through shared experiences. That's a skill worth showcasing, don't you think?" She dared to meet Tom's gaze, searching for validation in his eyes. A stillness enveloped the diner. For the first time, Sarah felt empowered by the energy of her words, her heartbeat settling into a steady rhythm as her message permeated the space. The diners leaned forward anticipating what would unfold next, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration and intrigue. Tom remained silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. The uncertainty gnawed at her, igniting the fears she had hoped to quell. What would he say? Would he dismiss her as just another competitor who failed to impress? Suddenly, his smile broke like dawn through clouds, a sense of resonance flickered between them. "You've just given me something different, something more profound than flash," he said, enthusiasm sparking in his eyes. "But are you ready to take that leap? The stage can be unforgiving." The anticipation surged again, as the weight of his question settled over Sarah, plunging deeper into her core. Just how far was she willing to go to expose herself, her truths, her stories? The very idea of stepping outside her comfort zone teased at her courage, asking her to rise to the occasion. "I am ready," she replied, firm conviction breaking through the remnants of her doubt. And with those words, she felt the boundaries of her existence elongate, blurring the lines between who she was and who she could become. As she gathered her thoughts, readying for whatever might come next, a new realization hit her: vulnerability was not a weakness but a powerful catalyst for change. But the next performance would require more than mere words. Could she summon the depth of the story she carried into an art form that not only honored her past but transformed her future? The challenge whispered in her ear like a siren's call: "What story will you tell next?" As the initial adrenaline of her declaration faded, Sarah stood there, buoyed by the approval in Tom's eyes but also plagued by an avalanche of thoughts. What lay ahead wasn't merely a path towards a stage, it was a leap into the unknown, where every flaw and fear could be painfully illuminated under the spotlight. In the days that followed, each shift at the diner transformed into a delicate ballet between service and soul-searching. As she poured coffee and cleared tables, Sarah began to observe her regulars with new eyes, not as mere patrons, but as the intricate mosaic of human stories that fueled her own narrative. There was Mrs. Evelyn, the lonely widow with tales of lost love, and young Charlie, the aspiring musician who risked his dreams despite numerous rejections. Each interaction became a lesson embedded with the threads of urgency, compassion, and genuine connection. She often found herself lost in thought, contemplating what it meant to be vulnerable in performance. The diner turned into an impromptu theater where she practiced weaving her observations into tales of shared experiences, preparing her for what was to come. It became clear that if she was to open up her heart and share it with an audience, she needed to understand the very fabric of the stories that surrounded her. Yet, the more she immersed herself in these narratives, the louder the voice of self-doubt grew. Was she really capable of taking this leap? Every story seemed larger than life itself, while she felt so small in comparison. In private moments, the competitor Sarah could often feel her insecurities creep back in, whispering doubts about her own worthiness, reminding her of how insignificant she felt in a world where grand performances reigned supreme. One evening, during a particularly busy dinner rush, exhaustion began to seep into her bones. Sitting alone at the diner's counter during a rare lull, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror behind the bar. What stared back wasn't just a weary waitress, but a woman on the brink of an awakening. The edges of her self-critique blurred slightly. The realization sparked an ember of fierce determination within her. With renewed clarity, she decided she would not only speak her truth but live it boldly. She turned her shift's monotony into a rhythmic dance of storytelling, infusing her service with anecdotes drawn from real-life humor, from the quirky dialogue of customers, the somber tales of those met along her journey, and the bursts of laughter that echoed through the diner. The connection with her patrons deepened, a reflective cycle of sharing, listening, and teaching. Each smile and nod she received turned her nervousness into anticipation. It was evident that people craved authentic experiences just as much as she craved acceptance. They leaned in, and the anticipation in their eyes spurred her on, awakening her voice further. As her confidence began to swell, she dared to approach Tom after a successful night, the diner still buzzing around them. "What would it take to refine my storytelling?" she inquired, her heart pounding with the weight of her ambition. Tom assessed her, a glimmer of approval in his eyes mingling with concern. "You've taken the first step, but remember, Sarah. The next leap requires more than passion. It's about risking everything, stripping away the layers until there's nothing left but truth." His words resonated with her, sparking a fierce commitment to hone her craft. Maybe it was time to consider what it would mean to truly embrace the stage. The thought of facing that crowd electrified her spirit, marrying her fear with excitement. Strengthened by the stories she had uncovered, the notion of unmasking her vulnerability no longer felt like a chore, it was a calling. As she began to plot her journey, a decisive thought hit her: what if risking it all meant igniting something extraordinary? The following days would be pivotal, not only in nurturing narratives that lay hidden within her but also in forging the next step towards claiming her place in a world she was still coming to understand. But even as the thrill beckoned, a sense of trepidation settled in. Could she truly expose her soul under the watchful gaze of an audience that could judge her every word? The foreboding question lingered, a challenge waiting to be confronted. How would she manage the weight of expectation while striving to remain authentic? Days melted into one another, each a blend of anticipation and introspection. Sarah found herself increasingly invested in her journey toward the stage. The diner had long ceased to be simply a job, it was now the crucible in which her identity was being forged. Each table she served allowed her to practice not just her storytelling but also a new way of seeing herself. On a particularly slow afternoon, she sat down with a notebook crammed with scribbled thoughts and mingled hopes. As she flipped through pages of half-finished stories, a flicker of agitation gnawed at her. Suddenly, the words on the page felt insufficient, like a flimsy shield against the raw vulnerability she knew would accompany her performances. The uneasiness intensified, prompting her to confront the real source of her fears. Who was she to expect the world to be captivated by her narratives when even she found them lacking? A sharp pang of self-doubt tightened around her throat, but she swallowed it down. Determined to reclaim her confidence, Sarah leaned into the tension by outlining a plan. It was time to challenge herself, to risk stepping beyond the confines of her comfort zone in search of the truth buried deep within. "Tom," she called out, gathering her scattered courage, "I need to practice storytelling in front of real people, not just in my head. How can I put my thoughts to the test?" Tom looked up from his shift at the grill, his brow furrowing slightly. "You're ready for open mic night at the cafe down the street," he replied, incredulity mixed with encouragement. "But you can't just throw something together, you'll need something solid." The prospect of an open mic night loomed before her like the flickering neon sign above the diner, pulsating with urgency. It would not just be a test, it was a commitment to strip down and reveal the essence of herself, unapologetically. She jotted down that date in bold letters on her notebook, the ink marking an endpoint and a starting line all at once. What was to follow in the days leading up to the event felt almost feverish. As she immersed herself in honing her stories, she quickly discovered the best narratives were those grounded in her emotional truth. She sought out moments of pain, joy, and everything in between. Conversations with Charlie sparked fiery motivation. He shared his experiences of fear and rejection with unabashed vulnerability, and each exchange became like building blocks for her storytelling. However, within this emerging confidence lay an underlying challenge, a growing tension between authenticity and the fear of judgment. The more she unveiled her stories, the more fragmented her sense of self. Would sharing her deepest struggles with an audience lead only to more exposure, opening old wounds? The commitment to vulnerability became both a source of strength and profound anxiety. One evening after a shift, Sarah stood outside the diner, staring at the stars that dotted the inky sky. The vastness felt both comforting and daunting. She could hear echoes of laughter wafting from the diner behind her, remember the faces of those who had shared their stories with her. Each one propelled her forward. They don't judge, they resonate, she whispered to herself, trying to reclaim that emboldened connection. As open mic night approached, she sensed a palpable energy building within her, a mix of apprehension and anticipation. There was a moment of clarity amidst the chaos. Embracing her truth was not about being perfect, it was about being real. Perhaps risking it all meant discovering an extraordinary kind of power within vulnerability. But a heartbeat thrummed louder than all else. What if the audience didn't resonate with her? What if they judged her mercilessly? That realization crushed her optimism like a wave against a cliff. Now, the stakes felt alarmingly high, the weight of expectation pressing down upon her. Could she bridge the gap between her internal fears and the performance that awaited her? The question lingered, poised on the precipice of her journey, a challenge, tipping her towards the edge of discovery. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself in a constant state of preparation, an internal storm brewing as she honed her tales. Each evening after her shifts at the diner, she pored over her notes, scrubbing them like a novice painter smoothing over rough strokes. The weight of open mic night grew heavier on her shoulders, and she refrained from telling anyone Tom knew, but other than him, she kept her intention locked away, shrouded in secrecy. This was her challenge, and she had to face it alone. She laced her narratives with small truths, angular fragments of herself willing to splinter before an audience. That unease morphed into a fierce desire for connection, an urgency to transform her anxiety into something palpable. Yet each word felt like a gamble, a dance along the tightrope she constructed over the chasm of self-doubt. If she fell, the audience would witness the cracks lining her carefully crafted facade. During her shifts, moments of revelation appeared unbidden. When dealing with the eclectic crowd of diners, she paid keen attention to their stories. She objectified the customers from her corner behind the counter, infusing elements of their lives into her burgeoning narratives. The mother with the tired eyes and the tired laugh, the perpetual student battling life's demands, and the lonely man who lingered over his coffee as though searching for warmth in the bottom of his cup, each person contributed a brushstroke to her evolving picture. The closer she got to the mic night, the more Sarah began to self-reflect. Would she reveal the vulnerability of her own experiences or fabricate a compelling alternate narrative that skirted the real pain? Was her authenticity a crutch or a weapon? The latter thought made her pause, as a glimmer of uneasiness crept in. It was then, in a moment of reflection, she came to a dawning realization: authenticity could be her greatest asset. Charlie's lingering voice echoed in her mind, emphasizing how true storytelling could be both healing and powerful. She began to write more fiercely, tempering raw thoughts into purposeful prose. The tangled threads of her life started weaving together into a tapestry she could be proud of, but doubt continued to gnaw at her. At work that day, a customer recognized her as the writer. It startled her, but she accepted the label with a bemused expression, her hands clasped tightly over her apron. Was she a writer? She'd never considered herself anything but a waitress before. Yet the thought stuck, it felt good, even if it was fleeting. "You're going to blow them away with your words," he encouraged with a knowing smile, and Sarah felt part of her soul sink at the unintentional weight he placed upon her. What if she didn't meet expectations? What if the applause was nothing but a hollow echo? The anxiety produced fresh beads of sweat on her brow, and she outwardly smiled yet internally wrestled with that possibility. Unable to shake the mounting pressure, Sarah decided to confront her turmoil directly. In a quiet corner of the diner after the late shift, she dialed an old friend, one who embraced performance art with her own brand of boldness. They spoke for hours, discussing fears, ambitions, and the paradox of vulnerability. This conversation became a lifeline, an assurance that she was not alone in her journey. The night before the mic awaited her, Sarah took one final look in the mirror, commit to a slow inhale and exhale that chased away the shivers simmering deep in her gut. She couldn't disguise who she was any longer, and every intonation of her voice deserved to echo with authenticity. But what would happen when she finally stepped into that spotlight? The question lingered in the chilled air, a whisper of daring potential that made her heart race. Would she find her voice among the obscured faces, or would the doubt consume her completely? In the cool, restless shadows of the night, Sarah felt her heart drum a solitary rhythm against her ribcage. The moment of truth was finally upon her. Tomorrow, the stage awaited. She tossed and turned, but sleep kept its distance. Images of potential failure swirled in her mind like relentless waves crashing against a fragile shore. What would she reveal? Would she crumble under the weight of expectation? Early morning light spilled into her cramped apartment as if it were spreading the promise of a new chapter. She dragged herself out of bed, her mind cluttered with the unrelenting whispers of apprehension, yet she was determined to quiet them. Today was not only about performance, it was a test of her own resolve, a chance to confront the narratives that had sown themselves into her waking hours. At the diner, the familiar clatter of dishes and the smell of coffee had a strangely comforting effect. It felt like home, a safe space where she could process the tempest of her thoughts. But this morning, she was not just a waitress, she was on the cusp of transformation. As she served the usual breakfast orders, the innocent chatter of the customers felt charged with significance. Each conversation seemed to echo her fears and hopes. "Are you okay, Sarah?" Tom asked, peering over his coffee cup, concern etching his features. His question pierced through the haze of her worry. She had spent so many days pretending everything was fine, convincing herself that silence was strength. "Nervous about tonight?" "Not at all," she lied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But deep down, she recognized the lie, felt the way it thudded in her chest, a reminder that she was still at war with herself. As the hours trudged on, her internal dialogue shifted. Each time her thoughts threatened to spiral into doubt, she reminded herself of the conversation with her friend, the reassuring words that reframed vulnerability as a power, not a hindrance. It flicked a light on within her. She recalled how she had spent the previous week collecting stories from the people around her, weaving their lives into her own, and that collection was far more than just creative fodder, it was a blueprint of shared humanity. After her shift ended, Sarah found herself in the back room of the diner, scribbling furiously. The ink danced across the page as phrases began spilling forth, intertwining her experiences with those she'd observed. The mother with the tired eyes became a metaphor for resilience. The lonely man transformed into a champion of solitude, an emblem of strength amidst isolation. A persistent voice echoed in her thoughts, reminding her to be both authentic and fearless. But as she poured her heart onto the paper, doubt crept back, grasping her wrist tightly, asking whether it was enough. The crinkled paper felt like a lifeline, yet one filled with so many potential flaws. This was vulnerability in its raw form, and it terrified her. As night fell, Sarah ventured toward the venue, the weight of her written words heavy in her bag. She swept her gaze across the bustling crowd, anxiety clawing at her stomach. What if they didn't connect with her? She shook off the thoughts, took a cleansing breath, and focused instead on the purpose behind her words. They were hers, woven with threads of truth and the struggles of both herself and others. But as she approached the stage, ready to share pieces of her heart for the first time, she noticed a familiar figure in the audience, a man she had seen many times before at the diner, a lone patron, his eyes fixed on her. He smiled, and for a brief moment, clarity washed over her. What if she wasn't simply sharing her story? What if she was inviting others to find their own? Stepping onto that stage could lead to unimaginable vulnerability and transformation. But would she plunge into that fear, or would she retreat behind walls she had built? The crowd's chatter faded as the spotlight washed over her, enveloping her in warmth. Everything she had rehearsed stirred within her, and the weight of countless eyes intensified, but she felt a flicker of something new. This was the moment she had been preparing for. What awaited her in the silence that would follow her first words? The silence enveloped her, a living entity pulsating with anticipation. The faint click of her microphone broke through the tension, snapping her focus back to the present. She scanned the attentive faces, a sea of curious expressions swimming in the spotlight's glow. They were looking at her, not just as a waitress, but as an emerging storyteller with stories worth sharing. Taking a deep breath, Sarah's heart raced anew, each beat echoing the stories she'd promised to tell. She felt exposed, like the delicate fabric of her written words was a barrier between her inner chaos and the reality before her. "Thank you for being here tonight," she began, her voice steadying as the timbre of determination seeped into her tone. "Tonight, I want to talk about connecting through our struggles, through our pain, and sometimes, even through our joy." As she ventured deeper into her narrative, weaving the tales of those she had spent the past week gathering, a calm swept over her. The story of the tired mother transformed into an anthem of resilience, punctuated by laughter and sighs from the audience, as they recognized their own struggles reflected in her words. Connected, organic, real, the stories came alive as they spilled out of her like a once-dammed river finally unleashed. Each line she delivered felt like a step towards not just liberation for herself, but for those who felt unseen. But just when the light of hope flickered brightly in her chest, a shadow danced at the periphery of her mind. What if this expression was futile? What if vulnerability crumbled under scrutiny? In that moment, her gaze landed on the man from the diner, still watching intently. His eyes radiated understanding, and somehow, from his unwavering presence, she drew strength as if he were a silent champion rooting for her success. "You know what?" she thought audaciously, almost defiantly. "This is not just a performance, it is an opportunity for authenticity." With grit, she steered into the deeper waters, the messy parts of herself, the fear and uncertainty, twining them into her narrative. She reflected on her own battles, revealing the cracks along her journey that had led her, step by tremulous step, toward this stage. As she shared her fears, the theater shifted, the weight of shared vulnerability pressed down upon the crowd, transforming the space from mere entertainment into a sanctuary of empathy. Each word anchored her more firmly into her purpose, and with each revelation, she felt shards of self-doubt shatter away, leaving behind a clarity that coursed through her veins. The applause at the end echoed around her, but the real applause was within an enthusiastic rhythm that drummed a new song of self-worth. As Sarah stepped off the stage, trembling yet revived, she felt as if she'd radiated color for the first time. She had embraced intimacy and stripped away the masks she had worn for so long. Just then, her eyes met the man's again, and he approached, a shy smile breaking across his face. "That was amazing," he said, the sincerity in his voice flooding her with warmth. "You have a gift." The compliment felt like a tapestry stitched from acceptance and admiration, intertwining the threads of her experience with his. But the night still held questions. Sarah's heart swelled, but shadows loomed as she pondered the implications of her newfound voice. What would this evolution mean for her future? Would she dare to chase this path of authenticity, or would fear still dictate her choices? In the depths of her thoughts, the night's revelations hung precariously like fine glass, ready to shatter or elevate her ambition. Breathing in deeply, Sarah turned toward the door, each step toward the exit feeling weightier yet more liberating than the last. Would she embrace the challenge of being seen, of forging her path as a storyteller among the many? Or was she fated to retreat once more from the spotlight's embrace? Only time would tell, but her heart urged her to face the unknown head-on. With the cool evening air wrapping around her, Sarah stepped outside the venue. The night felt charged, electric, as if the universe conspired to hold her in that moment. She paused, the triumphant adrenaline still coursing through her veins, and watched the clusters of people meandering through the streets, their laughter blending with the distant sounds of the city. Yet, amidst the excitement, an unsettling sense of urgency tugged at her. What if that performance was just a fleeting moment in time? What if, come morning, she slipped back into the familiar shadows where doubt clouded ambition? Her thoughts spiraled back to the man in the audience, his kind eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that insisted on her success. The memory of his compliment lingered, stirring within her both doubt and possibility. As she wandered, she felt an inherent need to explore the boundaries of her authenticity further. Her day-to-day life as a waitress offered little more than survival amidst the chaotic diner bustle. She had morphed into a sustainer rather than a creator. Could she sustain this new voice? Or would the demands of her routine weather it down until it faded into obscurity? Leaving the streetlights behind, she stumbled into the dim warmth of a nearby cafe. It smelled of brewed coffee and baked goods, a comforting embrace as she settled at a small table by the window. Pulling out her notebook, she threaded a pen through her fingers, staring at the blank pages sprawling before her like an expanse of uncharted territory. Inspiration had once flowed freely, but now, it felt obstinate, as if hesitant to resurface. Shifting in her seat, she grasped for clarity a silent plea that felt like a challenge. Could she blend her waitress experience with storytelling? It was a revelation that scratched at the edges of her mind, provoking a new thought. Why not write about the lives she served, the rich tapestry built from hurried conversations and fleeting glances? This could be the playground for her storytelling, an extension of the very vulnerability she had shared on stage. An honest portrayal of the swirling drama that unfolded continuously among the customers. Each encounter was a story waiting to be told. With newfound urgency, she filled the pages, weaving accounts of hope, despair, and the raw honesty of humanity. Each word felt like a thread connecting her to something larger, a definitive assertion that she could reclaim her narrative. Doubt still lingered, whispering fears of inadequacy that tugged at her thoughts. What if no one understood her stories? What if they deemed her experiences trivial compared to the mighty tales of heroic journeys? But then there was that voice, the one that ignited during her performance. The one that told her vulnerability was not her weakness, it was her strength. Just as she felt the spark boil within her, the cafe door jingled open, and in walked a familiar figure, the man from the diner. He spotted her instantly, an inquisitive look casting over his face as he made his way toward her table. Heart-thumping, Sarah felt like she was teetering on the edge of her own uncertainty, wondering whether this encounter would breathe life into her aspirations or plunge them back into shadow. "Hey," he said, genuine warmth marshalling his tone. "I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to share more of your stories. There's a local magazine looking for fresh voices, and I think you'd be incredible." His words cascaded over her, nourishing the flickering flame of hope that had begun to blaze within. Could it be that her chance had arrived, born from an unexpected place? The weight of the decision offered her both exhilaration and dread. She had to decide: dare she step further into her identity as a storyteller, or retreat, embracing the comfort of the familiar? In that moment, with a vibrant swirl of emotions churning inside her, Sarah faced a crossroads, to leap into the calling that whispered her name, or to linger in the safety of anonymity. The challenge was palpable, and she felt the pulse of her ambition thrumming. The stakes heightened. Would she seize this opportunity, or allow fear to dictate her narrative once more? In the days following her courageous performance, Sarah found herself immersed in a new rhythm of existence. The unexpected proposition from her diner patron, named David, hung over her like a charged storm cloud, with both anticipation and anxiety dancing in tandem. Determined, she began drafting stories that explored the essence of her interactions, each experience coloring her writing with authenticity. The cafe and diner transformed into her creative sanctuaries, spaces where her thoughts could unfurl freely. Conversations with regulars evolved into rich narratives, grounded in the lived experiences of those around her. Mrs. Evelyn's tales of lost love took form as poignant vignettes, while Charlie's unwavering hope painted a portrait of boundless dreams. In her pursuit of capturing real human connections through words, Sarah noticed a remarkable shift in her perspective. The voices of her patrons who had always felt so distant, now resonated intimately within her. No longer were they just backgrounds in her life but subjects imbued with purpose and meaning. She caught herself analyzing the diner's expressions, translating their emotions into prose. It was a dance of shared vulnerability, and each time she put pen to paper, the act of writing began to feel less like a burden and more like a calling. The deadline for submission to the magazine loomed yet grew closer and closer. Internally, she oscillated between fervent excitement and paralyzing doubt. What if no one cares about my stories? What if they think they're too mundane? Sarah's self-doubt crept in like an uninvited guest, drawing heavy curtains over her newfound light. But every time, she reminded herself of a fundamental truth unearthed during her performance, that vulnerability was a gateway to connection, not a sign of weakness. As she prepared her final draft, she recalled the audience's rapt attention, the energy of shared understanding that had enveloped her in the performance space. The thrill of storytelling swept into her words, empowering her to weave together her observations with her own history. The hopes, fears, and laughter became an expansive tapestry, each thread connecting her to a collective human experience. The day arrived for Sarah to submit her stories to the magazine. As she finalizes her manuscript, a renewed sense of purpose coursed through her veins. This wasn't merely about being published, it was about stepping into her identity as a storyteller, creating space for her voice and the voices of others in a world that often overlooked them. With a deep breath, she clicked send. For the first time, she felt a confidence bloom in the pit of her stomach. She was no longer merely the waitress serving coffee and pancakes but an emerging writer with something to say. This action felt like a declaration, a bold pledge to herself that she would continue to harness her truth and courageously face whatever came next. Weeks passed and each day brought updates from the magazine. Pairing the anticipation with her regular shifts at the diner, she navigated through daily tasks with visibility. The laughter exchanged with diners transformed into connections, their lives unfolded around her like stories unspoken. One fateful afternoon, Sarah caught sight of David standing at the entrance of the diner, a familiar smile framing his face. He approached her, cradling an envelope in his hand, and the world around them seemed to dissolve. "Sarah, you need to see this," he said, excitement in his eyes. Her pulse quickened, the reality of her submission striking her in visceral waves. The magazine publication had selected her stories for an upcoming issue. Not only would her writing be printed, but there would also be a feature about her journey, the waitress who had transformed into a voice for the unheard. Validation washed over her, accompanied by the joy of accomplishment. In that moment, Sarah reflected on her journey, noting the transformation she had undergone. She stood taller, more assured, the small-town waitress had evolved into a recognized storyteller, with a future that felt resolutely bright. The fears that had once tethered her down began to fade into echoes of the past, replaced by a fire that propelled her forward. Her heart pulsed with a resolute understanding, this was only the beginning. Embracing her vulnerability opened doors she had once thought inseparable from her identity. With deep pride, she understood that she had conquered significant fears and embraced authenticity without apologies. As she locked eyes with David, she knew they shared something special, a recognition that they had both been transformed by this journey. With gratitude bubbling over, Sarah vowed to honor her voice and her stories far beyond the pages of a magazine. She was ready to keep sharing her narrative and to inspire others to unearth their own. The diner faded into the background as new adventures beckoned ahead. With her heart brimming with purpose, she stepped forward into the world, ready to seize every opportunity. The stage was not merely for performance, it was a canvas for transformation, stitched together by stories waiting to be told. This was a defining chapter in Sarah's life, and as the sun set behind her, she embraced the dawn of her new journey, one where authenticity met opportunity, and every step forward was a leap of faith. Now is the time for you to experience the beauty of personal transformation. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories that unfold every week. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and support the spread of inspiring journeys. Comment your reactions and theories about Sarah's incredible transformation. Your voice matters. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need the motivation to embrace their own stories.